Snow fell like ash. Wind howled down the Bitterroot Pass, dragging cold across the town of Dead Elk like it was something to be punished. The streets were quiet, but watched every shuttered window, hid eyes, and every eye knew what ruled this place, Clay McGraw and his wolves. At the center of it all stood the Red Lantern Saloon, flickering with firelight, stained with laughter, blood, and whiskey. It was the only place still open after dark because it had to be. Because Clay said so. And into this place walked a man who hadn't been seen in over a decade. He pushed open the bat-wing doors with a hand like old bark fingers stiff from years of cold and callous. His coat was worn elk hide soaked with snowmelt, and his hat sagged low, shadowing a face carved by wind war and grief. No one knew his name, not yet. But every man in that room would remember the silence that followed his entrance. He walked slow, measured, boots clicking against warped floorboards like a ticking clock, past card tables, past whispers, past whiskey-stained laughter that slowly choked into unease. He sat in the far corner, back to the wall, facing the entire room. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He just sat and watched and waited. Behind the bar, Ruby Calhoun paused mid-pour. She'd seen her share of outlaws, bounty hunters, and union ghosts with blood still under their nails. But this man was different. There was no threat in his posture, no challenge, just something far colder. A kind of quiet that only men born of grave mistakes carried with them. She set the bottle down, eyes never leaving him. "You see him," she whispered to the man next to her, a drunk leaning hard into the counter. He squinted, frowned. Old-timer looks half froze. Probably just some trapper off the trail. Ruby didn't answer, because deep in her bones, she already knew. He wasn't lost. He'd come here for something. Look what the snow dragged in. Grady. Snake Elwood, one of McGraw's crew, stood up from the poker table, staggering toward the corner booth. He was drunk, tall, mean, and always looking for someone weaker to punch. Behind him, the other gang members chuckled, sensing a show. Snake stopped in front of the old man's table and stared down. "No one sits back here," he slurred. "This is where Clay sits when he feels like slumming it." The old man didn't move, didn't blink. He just reached slowly for his glass and took a drink, eyes locked on nothing in particular. Snake leaned in, smirking. "You deaf grandpa." The room had gone still. Ruby wiped a glass furiously, but her hand trembled. Sheriff Hollis wasn't coming. He hadn't stepped foot in the saloon in over 6 months. And Clay loved when people got humiliated, especially old men. Snake picked up the man's bottle of whiskey and poured it over his hat. Whiskey ran down the brim, soaking into that old hide. Snake chuckled. "Consider it a bath." Still nothing. No movement. No flash of anger. Just that still, cold silence. But something shifted. A breath. A chill. A weight that everyone in that room suddenly felt press against their chests. Snake frowned, unsure. "What's wrong with you, old man?" The old man looked up finally. His eyes were steel gray, and they didn't blink. They didn't shake. They just looked at Snake like he was already buried under the snow. A few feet back, one of the younger gang members whispered, "That old man's got a stare like he's seen the other side." Snake took a step back. Then, recovering pride, slammed his hand down on the table, knocking over the glass. "You got a death wish, old-timer." The man's voice came slow, dry, and hollow. "No, but I ain't running from it neither." Snake blinked. The bar held its breath. From the stairs above, Clay McGraw watched from the shadows, sipping bourbon, his face split with a crooked smile. "Let the geezer have his drink," he said lazily. "I like watching ghosts drink whiskey." Snake hesitated, then spat in the man's empty glass and stormed off. The old man reached across the table, turned the glass upright again, and stared at it. Ruby couldn't take her eyes off him. He reminded her of something she didn't want to remember, of a time when the world still had men who righted wrongs, of blood spilled that meant something. And this man, soaked in snow and whiskey, looked like he'd crawled out of the past to settle debts no one else could. Outside, the storm deepened. Bo Ransom stood outside the saloon in the freezing dark hat, dripping with whiskey coat, stiff with ice. He took off the hat slowly, poured it out, and looked up at the full moon. His breath fogged in the air. The cold didn't bother him. He'd lived alone in the mountains of Bitterroot for nearly 10 years. The cold was his friend. The snow kept him hidden. The wind erased his tracks. But pain, that was something no season could bury. He reached inside his coat, felt the photograph folded deep in his vest pocket. It was still there. Cracked. Faded. His wife. His daughter. Gone because of a name. Tobias Kinney. And tonight, he'd seen him. Across the saloon, laughing. Alive. He hadn't known Bo was watching. Not yet. But he would. Come sunrise, that bastard would know exactly who had come back from the dead. He thought I froze to death in the desert, but hell ain't that kind. Snow fell heavier that night, burying the blood in silence. Bo Ransom climbed the crooked staircase of Widow Tierney's boarding house, each step aching in his knees like rusted hinges. He hadn't spoken a word since leaving the saloon. Didn't need to. Everything worth saying had already been etched behind his eyes. The room she'd given him was barely bigger than a coffin. One window, one bed, a wash basin with a cracked mirror. It would do. Bo closed the door behind him and bolted it not out of fear but habit. He peeled off his soaked coat, the whiskey-stained hat, and hung them by the stove. The room was ice, but he moved slow, methodical, like the cold didn't touch him anymore. He knelt beside his bed and unlatched the old canvas satchel he hadn't opened in years. The first thing he took out was a small bundle wrapped in worn buffalo hide. He unwrapped it with reverence, like a priest unsealing a relic. 2 Colt .45 peacemakers, custom grips, polished steel, still gleaming beneath dust and time. Etched into each ivory handle were the initials BR. He laid them on the bed, then reached deeper into the satchel and pulled out a square of oilskin. Unfolded it slowly. A photograph, creased, yellowed, fragile. A young woman with dark hair stood beside a soldier in a Confederate uniform. She held a little girl with wild curls and a dandelion in her fist. All 3 of them were smiling. Bo stared at it a long time. His thumb traced the outline of the woman's face. He whispered something. It might have been her name. Might have been a prayer. He placed the photo on the nightstand beside the pistols and sat down heavily on the bed. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried in 15 years. The last tear he ever shed dried on his cheek the day he buried them under a cottonwood tree in northern Texas. Back when he thought pain had a bottom. It didn't. Back when he thought justice meant something. It didn't. The fire snapped in the stove as he leaned forward, elbows on knees. The weight of the past settled over him like a second skin. He remembered the smoke, the heat, the screams. His horse had crested the ridge just as the sun was going down. The sky was red that night, blood red. His cabin was already in flames. They'd come while he was away tending cattle half a day's ride out. 6 men, deserters from the Union, cowards and thieves. He saw the bodies later, his wife still clutching the child in her arms. They'd lit the place up with kerosene and laughter. He knew the names, every last one of them. Spent the next 2 years hunting them down one by one. Some he found drunk in brothels, others hiding in mining camps, towns where lawmen took bribes and looked the other way. He made each death personal. He wanted them to feel what he felt, wanted their last moments to be soaked in the kind of terror they'd given his girls. All but one. Tobias Kinney, the youngest, the one who planned the raid but ran when things turned bloody. Vanished into the north, changed his name, slipped into shadows. Until tonight. Tonight, Bo had seen him again. Fatter now, older, but that smirk hadn't changed. The same bastard grin that watched his home burn. Bo leaned forward, staring at the photograph on the nightstand. The firelight flickered over the girl's face. He spoke finally, voice like gravel under boots. "You were 5. His hands trembled not from age but memory. He reached for the pistols and began to clean them. Each piece removed and oiled in ritual silence. Every screw, every chamber. He knew these guns better than he knew his own voice. Because a voice could lie. A gun couldn't. He loaded each one with 6 rounds. Slow, measured. These bullets weren't store-bought. He'd cast them himself. Years ago in the mountains when he still believed he'd never have to fire them again. That hope had died tonight. He set the guns down gently and reached into the bottom of the satchel. Pulled out something heavier. A warrant. Old. Torn. Signed by a Texas Ranger who died in '73. Bo Ransom. Wanted for 27 counts of murder across 5 states. Reward $5,000. Dead or alive. He folded it and put it back. He wasn't ashamed of what he'd done. Shame was a luxury for clean men. And Bo Ransom hadn't been clean since the night his daughter's hair caught fire. Outside, the wind howled through the alleyways of Dead Elk, a town that had stopped caring about right and wrong long before McGraw took it. A town just waiting to be buried under snow or something worse. He sat there staring into the dark until the stove turned red and the shadows danced. He closed his eyes and saw flames. Again. The same dream, the same scream. He snapped awake before dawn. His hand had already reached the gun beside his bed before his eyes opened. It was muscle memory now. Bo stood dressed, strapped the Colts low on his hips. He wasn't as fast as he'd been, but he didn't need to be. These boys shot like they talked loud and sloppy. But Tobias Bo knew the kid had always been scared, even back then. And scared men made the worst choices. He looked at the photo once more, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his inner coat pocket. He wasn't doing this for justice. Justice was dead. He was doing this for peace, the only kind a man like him could earn. The kind you carve from the bones of the past. And when he walked out of that room, boots heavy on the stairs, guns loaded at his sides, he wasn't Bo Ransom anymore. He was what they made him, what they'd buried and left to rot. And now he was walking back. He thought they killed me, but I was just reborn in fire. The first time Tobias Kinney saw Bo Ransom was through the warped mirror behind the saloon bar. He was lifting a shot glass ready to toast another pointless night when he caught sight of the old man walking in. He didn't recognize the coat, or the beard, or the limp. Time had broken Bo into pieces, but then the man looked up, and Tobias saw the scar, a pale, jagged crescent on the left cheek, He remembered it from a lifetime ago. The kind of wound you didn't get unless you'd been too close to dying to walk away clean. Tobias froze. The shot glass slipped from his fingers and shattered against the floor. Someone laughed. Someone cursed. But Tobias didn't hear any of it, because ghosts weren't supposed to walk through saloon doors. He stumbled back toward the corner, dropping into a chair like his legs couldn't carry him anymore. His breath came short, shallow. He tried to tell himself it couldn't be him. The man was supposed to be dead, left for the buzzards in some stretch of Texas desert. Clay had said he'd seen the body, but Tobias had never believed it. Not really. Not deep down where truth gets buried. He sat still for nearly an hour, watching Bo from across the room, watching the way he didn't flinch when Snake humiliated him, watching the way he didn't blink when whiskey hit his face. Cold. Still. Like something that had stopped being human. Tobias knew that silence, knew what it meant. Bo Ransom wasn't here for whiskey. He was here for him. Crow. Clay McGraw's voice snapped him back. He looked up. The gang leader stood beside him, drink in hand, grinning like the devil in a Sunday coat. "You see that mess Snake made of the old man?" Tobias swallowed hard. "Yeah, I saw." Clay pulled a chair, sat backward on it, arms resting on the back. "Old bastard's got some stones, huh?" Didn't blink once. Hell, half the room was nervous. Tobias tried to steady his voice. "You ever heard of a man named Bo Ransom?" Clay raised an eyebrow. "Name sounds familiar." "Why, he's from Texas. Used to be a mountain man. Trapper. Was in the war. Confederate side." Clay shrugged. "Ain't exactly a rare type." Tobias leaned in, voice low. "His family was murdered. Wife and little girl. Back in '68. Clay's grin faded. "You telling me that's him? I think it is." Tobias's voice cracked. "I think he's here for me." Clay sat back. Thought he was dead. We all did. Damn. So the ghost of Bitterroot's real. Tobias didn't answer. He didn't need to. Clay saw it in his face. The saloon seemed colder suddenly. The fire popping in the hearth no longer reached their table. Clay chuckled to himself, but there was less heat behind it. "Well, shit, Crow. If the old man's here to kill you, guess it's good. I've got 20 men who shoot straight." "He doesn't need 20 men," Tobias whispered. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I've seen him kill 6 men in under 10 seconds. Didn't even look like he was trying. Every shot hit center, like he already knew where they'd be before they moved." Clay stared at him, trying to read whether it was fear or madness talking. "You really believe he's here for revenge after 15 years? Tobias met his eyes. "You ever bury a man alive and not check the body?" Clay didn't respond. Tobias stood up suddenly. "I'm leaving." "Sit down," Clay growled. "You run, you make this worse. He'll chase you. I don't care. He's one man, Tobias. He's not a man. Not anymore." Clay slammed his hand on the table, making the bottle jump. "Jesus, you're shaking like a leaf. Get a hold of yourself." Tobias clenched his fists. "You didn't see what he did to those others. You weren't there. I watched him hang Lyle from a bridge and carve words into his chest. I saw what was left of Holloway. You remember Price? They never found his damn head." Clay narrowed his eyes. "So what do you want me to do, kill him?" Clay let out a breath through his nose. "We will. If he doesn't leave by morning, I'll give the order. He won't leave." then he'll die. Tobias said nothing, just turned and walked out the back door into the freezing alley. Snow bit into his skin, but it didn't register. All he could feel was the weight in his gut, a slow, grinding kind of fear that came from knowing a reckoning had finally arrived. He pulled a flask from his coat and drained half of it. His hands were trembling. Up until now, he'd told himself it wasn't his fault, that he hadn't lit the match, that Clay made the call, that he was just following orders, just trying to survive. But standing in the dark, he saw her face again. The little girl, 5 years old, curly hair, holding a flower. She'd looked straight at him from the flames. She hadn't screamed. She'd stared. And he'd ridden away. A coward. A traitor. And now the past had come to collect. He pressed his back against the wall and slid down into the snow. A whisper in the wind sounded like boots on snow. He looked around. Nothing. But he knew better. Bo Ransom was in town, and Tobias Kinney was living on borrowed time. That scar, it's him. It's the damn ghost of Bitterroot. The first one didn't beg. Bo found him in a saloon outside El Paso. Man named Lyle Watkins. Big talker. Bigger drinker. Bo waited until he was too drunk to stand, then dragged him out behind the stables and put a rope around his neck. No speech. No warning. Just a whisper. For Annie. And then Bo kicked the crate out from under him and watched the body swing in the pale desert moonlight. The wind creaked the beam like an old rocking chair. It was just the beginning. He'd written their names on a page torn from a ledger book: Watkins Holloway, Price Moreland, Deke Kinney. 6 men, 6 devils. He'd spent the next 2 years crossing states, sleeping on stone eating roots, killing without hesitation. He didn't ask questions. He didn't send messages. He wasn't out to make statements or collect bounties. He was burning a ledger. Each name he crossed off didn't make the world cleaner. It just made the next name feel heavier. Holloway died choking on his own tongue. Price bled out in a church after Bo cornered him during Sunday service. The preacher never finished his sermon. Moreland took 2 in the knee and Bo let him crawl through the mud for an hour before finishing it. But Deke was the one that changed something. Bo found him hiding in the Rockies, married 2 sons, a shopkeeper's apron, and a different name. Bo waited until the family left for church, then walked in. Deke froze when he saw him. "You came all this way. Just for me," he whispered. Bo didn't answer. He just raised the gun. But Deke didn't beg either. He didn't cry. He looked Bo in the eyes and said, "Do it quick." Bo hesitated. Not long, but long enough for something inside him to shift. He pulled the trigger anyway. But that night, he didn't sleep. For the first time, the girl's scream wasn't the only voice in his dreams. Deke's was there too. After that, the killing slowed. Not from fear, but from the gnawing realization that vengeance didn't end when the body hit the dirt. It followed you. It rotted you. Bo stopped chasing rumors. He sold his horse, moved into the mountains, built a cabin by hand up near the Bitterroot line where no man wandered unless he had a death wish or something to forget. He lived there 10 winters, didn't speak to another soul for 4 of them. He became the woods, the snow, the cold creek water that numbed your fingers. Every scar hardened until he was more stone than flesh. Folks in nearby towns started telling stories. A ghost with a scar and white hair. A man who never missed a shot. A drifter who appeared only when the innocent were under threat, then vanished again into pine shadows. He didn't ask for that legend. He hated it, because it meant they didn't see the blood under his fingernails, didn't hear the screams at night. They didn't know that his last name wasn't Ransom. It was Regret. That would have been the end of it. Would have died nameless in the snow, buried under silence and snowdrift, until that knock on the cabin door. A stranger, half frozen, bleeding, his horse dead a mile back. Bo let him in, fed him broth, sat by the fire without speaking. The man didn't give his name, but he talked. Fever made him reckless. Told Bo about a town called Dead Elk, run by a man named Clay McGraw, and under him a second in command with a scar on his forearm and a past no one talked about. Name of Tobias Kinney. The moment he said it, Bo stood up. The stranger didn't notice. Didn't see how Bo's fists clenched. Didn't feel the air change. The man died before dawn. Bo buried him out back beneath a cairn of frozen stones. Next morning, he went into the woods, found the old satchel, dug it out from where it was buried beneath 5 feet of dirt. He didn't open it then. Not yet. He spent the next week preparing. Not his weapons, his soul. He knelt at the riverbank every morning, letting the water freeze his bones. Sharpened his focus, honed his quiet. Because when he left those woods, he would be walking into death, his own or someone else's. And if that meant finishing the list, so be it. He left before dawn, same as he had after every killing. But this time there was no hate, only cold. Now back in Dead Elk, he stood at the window of his rented room, watching the streetlights flicker in the snow. People were hurrying home, doors shutting, curtains pulled. He knew the look. A town ruled by fear. He'd seen it in Texas, in Kansas, in Utah. It was the look of people waiting for someone else to stand up. Well, someone just had. He turned from the window and sat beside the stove. There was still one name left. Only one. And the ghost wasn't going back to the mountains until it was done. Justice never dies. It just waits for someone to carry the gun. The sun came up mean and low, turning the snow into slush and the air into razors. Dead Elk didn't wake up so much as braced itself. Doors creaked open just enough to slide brooms across porches. Shopkeepers kept one eye on the street and one hand near the cash drawer. The people here had learned that quiet didn't mean peace. It just meant Clay McGraw hadn't decided who to hurt yet. Bo Ransom stood still in the middle of it, leaning against the porch post outside Widow Tierney's place, chewing on a dry piece of jerky. His eyes tracked movement, not fast, but trained patient like a wolf watching a herd. He spotted them before they even rounded the corner. 3 of McGraw's boys wearing that same too loose confidence men wear when no one said no to them in too long. They walked with a bounce, spitting and laughing rifles slung across their backs like trophies. The one in the middle, Bull Maddox, a block of meat with a mustache like barbed wire, was already shouting. "Hey, Chinaman, you forget to pay your tax today." Bo turned his head slowly. The old Chinese apothecary, Mr. Shen, was setting out his herbal tins under the shop awning. He looked up startled, but said nothing. His English wasn't strong, but he understood what was coming. Bull grabbed one of the trays and flung it across the street herbs, scattering like confetti into the snow. Shen flinched, bent to gather them. One of the other men laughed and gave him a shove with his boot. Mr. Shen hit the ground hard. His hands scrabbled through the slush, picking up whatever roots hadn't been trampled. "Speak American, damn it," Bull growled. "This ain't your street. You want to sell trash in Dead Elk, you pay the McGraw tax." Bo didn't move. Not at first. No one else did either. Not the woman behind the bakery curtain. Not the man sweeping in front of the feed store. Not even the sheriff watching from the jailhouse steps, a coffee cup in his hand and a badge that hadn't meant a thing in years. Bo watched Mr. Shen crawl. Then he dropped the jerky and stepped down off the porch. The boards creaked under his weight. His boots made thick, deliberate sounds on the frozen ground. He crossed the street slow, every step a decision. Bull noticed him coming and turned. Well, look who's back out of his hole. Bo stopped a few feet from Mr. Shen, who was bleeding from the lip. He didn't look at Bull. Just reached down and gently helped the old man to his feet. You all right? Bo asked, voice rough as gravel. Mr. Shen blinked at him, unsure, then nodded slowly. Yes. Thank you. Bull snorted. Ain't your business, old man. Bo turned now, faced him, took a long moment to see the man. The puffed chest, the twitchy fingers. Not dangerous, just loud. He said nothing. Bull stepped closer. You deaf or just stupid? Still no answer. Bo glanced over at the sheriff and Ben Hollis, who took a long, thoughtful sip of his coffee and didn't move. Bo turned back to Bull. That man don't owe you a damn thing, he said quietly. And neither do I. Bull's jaw dropped. The street went silent. The other two men behind him shifted uneasily, waiting for Bull to make the next move. And he did. He drew, fast, but not fast enough. Bo's hand barely flicked, and suddenly the barrel of his Colt was pointed at Bull's face, calm and steady. No noise, no shout, just cold, certain silence. Bull froze the hammer on his revolver half-cocked. Bo didn't blink. You want to test the weight of that gun, Bo said softly. Go ahead. But I promise you, you won't finish the draw. Sweat bloomed on Bull's forehead. The air had gone brittle. Bo didn't pull the trigger. He just stood there, gun drawn, as if time had stopped around them. Then slowly Bull lowered his weapon. Bo held his gaze for one more second, then holstered the Colt. The tension snapped like a cable under strain. Bo looked back to Mr. Shen and nodded toward the shop. You get on now. Mr. Shen didn't argue. He gathered his tins and scurried inside. Bull stood there, still breathing hard. The other two flanked him, silent now. Pick up his tray, Bo said. They hesitated. Bo raised an eyebrow. They picked it up. The street was watching now. Windows opened just a crack wider. Heads turned. Bo looked up at the sheriff one last time. Ben Hollis met his gaze and looked away. Bo said nothing as he walked back across the street. He didn't gloat, didn't smile. Just took his place again on the porch, leaned back against the post, and resumed chewing. But something had shifted. The air, the way the wind moved, the weight of silence in the town. Ruby saw it from the saloon window. She'd seen that kind of quiet before, right before thunder cracks the sky. Inside the jail, Sheriff Hollis set his coffee down and stared at his own badge, now catching morning light on its dull, dusty surface. It felt heavier than it used to. He muttered under his breath, "Damn it, Bo. You picked the wrong town to play hero, old man." The Red Lantern Saloon pulsed with whiskey and sweat lantern light flickering against wood that had soaked up 20 years of spilled liquor and blood. Laughter rolled like thunder across the floorboards, loud, brash, but hollow underneath. It was always loudest when men were trying not to be afraid. Clay McGraw leaned back in his chair on the second-floor balcony, boots propped on the rail, bottle of bourbon in one hand, cigar in the other. He watched his crew below. 20 men, rough-edged and reckless, loud with their victories. The town was his. The silence, the fear that was all him. But something felt off tonight. Snake Elwood had just finished telling the story about the old-timer pulling a gun on Bull Maddox in broad daylight. Everyone laughed, except Clay. He exhaled smoke through his nose, eyes narrowing. Bo Ransom. The name echoed from Crow's lips earlier like a curse. Clay didn't believe in curses, but he believed in stories. And this one was starting to sound familiar. He looked to the far end of the saloon where Tobias Crow Kinney sat nursing a bottle he hadn't put down since morning. Crow's hand shook every time he tried to pour. He wasn't talking, just staring into the bottle like maybe salvation was somewhere at the bottom. Clay stood up, stretched, and made his way down the stairs, slow, casual, like a man with time on his side. "You still flinchin' like a schoolgirl?" he asked Crow voice, quiet but sharp. Crow looked up, face pale, eyes rimmed red. "You saw what he did to Bull." "Yeah," Clay said. "I saw." Crow hesitated. "He's not gonna stop." "You know that, right?" Clay crouched beside him, laid a hand on his shoulder. "That's the part you keep missing, Tobias. This ain't a game about stopping. It's about who ends first." Crow blinked. Clay grinned. "He's just a man. Maybe he was something once. Maybe. But now he's old. Alone. You think I'm scared of a ghost?" Crow didn't answer. Because he was. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the others, Watkins, Holloway, Deke. And now Bo Ransom had walked into Dead Elk like time had folded in on itself. A shiver crawled up his spine. Clay stood. "If he's dumb enough to come in here again, we finish it." And that's when the doors blew open. Not kicked, not slammed, just opened. Like the wind had pushed them and invited the storm in. Every eye turned. And there he was. Bo Ransom. Framed by the last light of dusk, long coat trailing behind him like a shadow with a purpose. His hat low, his steps deliberate. No guns drawn, but he didn't need to. Every man in that saloon felt their own weapons grow heavier the second he stepped inside. Clay didn't move. Bo walked the length of the saloon floor, boots echoing on wood like the sound of a clock winding down. He stopped dead center, looked straight at Clay, then shifted his gaze to Tobias Kinney. Crow stood up too fast, knocking his bottle over. He didn't reach for his gun. He didn't move toward the door. He just stood there waiting to be erased. Bo didn't speak right away. He took in the room. Each man, every twitch, every ounce of breath. Then finally, voice steady and low, "I'm here for him." No one needed to ask who him was. Clay's lips curled. "You got a way of showing your age, Ransom. Ain't no one here afraid of bedtime stories." Bo didn't blink. "Good. You'll sleep through the sunrise." Snake stood hand twitching near his pistol. Clay waved him down. "Say your piece, old man," he said. Bo's eyes stayed on Crow. "I want Tobias Kinney. You hand him over and I walk. No blood, no echoes." Crow opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Clay barked a laugh. "You serious?" "You want to fight," Bo said. "I've seen fights. This won't be that. This'll be a massacre, and every man in this room knows it." Clay stepped forward. "You got sand, Ransom, I'll give you that. But this is my town. You walk in here wagging your ghost stories around and think we'll kneel." Bo stepped forward too. One step, measured. "I ain't here to teach manners, McGraw. I'm here to finish something I should have finished 15 years ago. And if that means stepping over 20 corpses to get to him, He nodded toward Crow. Then I've walked bloodier roads. The room went dead quiet. Even the whiskey stopped moving in glasses. Clay's jaw tightened. His hand hovered near his gun, then dropped to his side. He stared at Bo for a long moment, then smiled like a snake in the sun. "You've got till dawn," Clay said. "That's me being generous. Come sunrise, if you're still breathing in my town, you won't be for long." Bo looked around the room again. Let his eyes land on every man. Let the weight of what was coming settle in their bones. Then he said, "Sunrise it is." He turned and walked out. No one stopped him. No one even breathed. Only when the doors swung shut behind him did sound return low murmurs, nervous glances, the distant toll of a bell no one had noticed until now. Clay turned back to his crew, his voice steady, loud. "Load up. Check your rounds. Anyone not ready to bleed tomorrow better ride out tonight." Crow didn't move, didn't speak, just sat back down, bottle forgotten on the floor. Snake swallowed hard. "He's bluffing, right?" Clay didn't answer, because he wasn't sure. Back outside, Bo walked down the center of Main Street, past flickering lanterns, past locked doors and eyes behind curtains. He didn't need to see them to know they were there. Watching. Waiting. The town was holding its breath. Bo stepped onto the porch of the boarding house. Ruby stood in the shadows, arms folded. "You just declared war," she said. Bo nodded. "Only takes one bullet to end a war. Sometimes two. You think he'll really face you?" He looked up at the sky, pale with the last breath of dusk. "I don't care if he does. One way or another, the sun's rising over truth." Ruby watched him go upstairs. She didn't follow. She didn't sleep that night. Neither did most of Dead Elk. At dawn, you'll see what a dead man looks like when he remembers how to kill. The hour before dawn was the quietest. Not peaceful, just still. Like a breath caught in the chest of the town. Bo Ransom sat at the edge of his bed, boots planted, shirt half-buttoned, pistol laid out on the table in front of him. His fingers worked slow, rubbing oil into the cylinder like a priest preparing communion. Everything in that room had weight, the ticking of the clock, the groan of the floorboards, the rustle of Ruby's skirt behind him. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, backlit by the soft orange of the hallway lamp. "I brought coffee," she said. Bo didn't look up. "Thanks." She set it down next to the gun, careful not to spill a drop. He finally turned toward her, his face worn from nights too long and years too heavy. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I couldn't sleep." He gave a slow nod. "Me neither." Ruby leaned against the doorframe. "Clay's men are loading rifles, placing lookouts on the rooftops. You think you'll live through this?" Bo looked at the gun. "Don't much matter if I do. That's a hell of a thing to say. It's a hell of a town." She took a seat in the chair opposite him. "You're going to kill him, aren't you, Tobias?" Bo didn't answer. She tried again. "Even if he begs." His eyes met hers. There was no hatred in them, just something harder, like mercy that had been shaved down to bone. He had a choice once, Bo said. He made it. Ruby looked away down at her hands. And if killing him doesn't fix it, Bo's voice was low, it won't. That silence stretched again, thick with unspoken grief. Ruby finally asked, then why Bo leaned back, staring out the window at the pale silver sky. Because there's a weight a man carries when the world lets the guilty walk. Every step I've taken since Texas, every mile, it's been for the little ones buried without a name, for the women left in fire, for men who looked the other way and called it survival. She didn't speak. Bo stood, stretched his arms, joints popping like worn saddle leather. He slid the gun into its holster, checked the rounds again, not because he needed to, but because rituals mattered. He walked past her toward the door. "You should leave town," he said. "I'm not going anywhere," Ruby replied. Bo paused. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Something like sorrow. Something like thanks. Then he was gone, his boots thumping down the stairs each step, the sound of something coming to an end. Out in the street, the town was just beginning to wake. Pale light crept across the snow-covered ground. Frost glimmered on railings and rooftops. Shadows moved behind drawn curtains. Bo walked through it all like a man headed to a funeral. Maybe his, maybe someone else's. Down the street outside the jail, Sheriff Ben Hollis sat with his badge polished for the first time in years. His rifle leaned against the wall beside him untouched. He saw Bo coming and stood. They didn't greet, didn't smile, just looked at each other like men who'd once been something and knew today would remind them why. "You ready?" Hollis asked. Bo nodded. I ain't sure who I'm more scared for." "Doesn't matter. We'll all be different men by sunset." They walked together past shuttered stores and bolted doors until they reached the center of town. The saloon doors were still closed, but Bo knew they were watching. Guns behind barrels, eyes behind curtains. He stopped in the center of the street. Let the silence settle. Then he shouted, "McGraw-Kinney sons up." The doors creaked open. Clay McGraw stepped out first, dressed sharp, long rifle, slung low, a revolver at each hip. Behind him, a dozen men filtered out, fanning along the balconies and street edges. Crow came out last. His face was pale, his hand shaking as he held his pistol at his side. Bo didn't flinch. Clay smiled. "Didn't think you'd show." "I never left," Bo said. Clay raised a hand to his men, signaling them to hold. "You got a death wish, no?" "I got a list." His hand hovered near his holster. Crow took a shaky step forward. "Bo." "Don't," Bo said, sharp as a blade. "You don't get to talk." Crow's eyes glistened. "I didn't want to kill them. I didn't plan it. I was young. Stupid." "You were there," Bo snapped. The street held its breath. Hollis, still beside him, whispered, "You sure about this?" "Oh." Said nothing. He just looked at Crow. "You saw my little girl burn," he said. "You turned your horse and rode away." Crow dropped to his knees. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Bo stepped forward. "I'm not here for your sorry." He raised his gun. Crow's shoulders tensed, but the shot didn't come. Instead, Bo turned and fired at the rooftop. One of McGraw's men dropped hard, his rifle still aimed. The town exploded. Gunfire cracked like lightning. Bo rolled behind a trough, hollering, "Get down!" Sheriff Hollis returned fire, pinning a shooter in the saloon window. Ruby burst from the boarding house with a shotgun covering the alley behind Bo. Bullets screamed. Screams rang out. But Bo didn't look for cover. He moved through it, calculated, cold. 2 more men fell. Then a third. Crow scrambled into the dirt, covering his head, crawling back behind a crate. Clay fired wildly, cursing Bo's name with every shot. Then, click. Empty. Bo stepped out into the middle of the street, blood on his coat, smoke curling from the barrel of his gun. He stared at Clay. "Hand him over," Bo said. Clay raised both hands slowly, then spat blood. He's all yours. Bo turned his gaze back to Tobias. Crow looked up from the ground lips, trembling. Bo, please. Begging don't work where ghosts walk, Kinney. Snowflakes fell slow and quiet like ash from a fire that had burned too hot, too fast. Bo Ransom stood over Tobias Kinney in the middle of Main Street, the barrel of his Colt hovering inches from the man's forehead. The gun was steady. His breathing wasn't. Around them, the town was silent again, not with fear, but with aftermath. Smoke curled from broken windows. Clay McGraw's men were scattered, some dead, some fled. Hollis limped toward the jailhouse, bleeding from the shoulder, but alive. Ruby stood at the edge of the street, shotgun lowered, mouth half open, like she was holding back a scream. Tobias looked up at Bo through watery eyes. He didn't try to run. He didn't plead again. He just said, "Do it." Bo's finger twitched on the trigger, but the shot didn't come. Because something broke loose inside him, something unexpected. It wasn't forgiveness, and it sure as hell wasn't pity. It was memory, not of Tobias, but of Annie. Her laugh, the way her boots slapped the porch when she ran to him after trapping lessons. The sound of her mother's voice, Eliza humming in the kitchen, slicing apples, pressing flowers between pages. Those sounds used to be warm, but for 15 years they'd been nothing but gasoline to his fire. And now, Osham, they came back soft. Painful, yes, but soft. Tobias blinked, confused, when Bo lowered the gun. His voice cracked. Why Bo stepped back? Because killing you would mean I'm still carrying you. Tobias didn't understand. Bo holstered the Colt. You don't get to live free, Kinney. You'll carry it, just like I did. You'll wake with it, sleep with it, rot with it. Ruby stepped forward, now slow. She looked from Bo to Tobias, then down the street where the last gunshots had stopped. The whole town was watching through cracked shutters and broken blinds. You're letting him go, she asked. No, Bo said, shaking his head. I'm letting him live. That's worse. Tobias collapsed fully into the dirt, tears streaking through ash on his cheeks. Bo turned to walk away. Ruby followed. Are you sure about this, Bo? Stopped and faced her. I've killed enough men to know the difference between revenge and peace. Today ain't justice, it's weight. And I'm done carrying what don't belong to me no more. She studied his face. It wasn't the same one that had ridden into town. Something had shifted, not softened, but cleared, like a man waking from a long, cold sleep. Behind them, Hollis called out, Bo. He turned. The sheriff walked toward them, cradling his shoulder. The town owes you. I didn't do it for the town. Still, Hollis said, reaching into his coat and pulling something out, a folded badge dull with time. She's yours if you want it. Bo took the badge, looked at it, then handed it back. I'm not law. Never was. Hollis nodded. Figured. Bo stepped past him. But Ruby didn't move. She stood in the middle of the wrecked street, shotgun still cradled in her arms. Bo looked back. You coming? I need to stay a while, she said. There's a town here that might finally grow roots. Bo looked around. Smoke? Blood. Quiet, maybe. He gave a small nod. Ruby walked up to him and reached out, touching the scar on his cheek with her fingertips. You ain't a ghost, Bo. He didn't answer. Didn't know how. Instead, he tipped his hat and walked. Past the saloon, past the jail, past the bodies and bullet holes and pieces of what once ruled this town. He didn't look back. By the time the sun cleared the mountaintops, Bo Ransom had vanished into the trees beyond Dead Elk. Tobias Kinney would live and carry. But something had shifted deeper than revenge. Bo hadn't found peace. But maybe he'd stopped feeding the war inside him. And maybe that was enough. The worst punishment is waking up every day knowing you're still breathing when they're not. Snow didn't fall the next morning. It just hung there, gray and stubborn, heavy in the clouds, like it was waiting for permission to drop. Dead Elk sat under it like a town holding its breath, unsure whether to bury the dead or pretend none of it ever happened. Ruby stood on the porch of the saloon, arms folded, shotgun leaning beside her. The place reeked of smoke and old whiskey windows, cracked floorboards, blood-soaked. Someone had started sweeping up the broken glass. Someone else had taken the corpses to the edge of town and dug 3 shallow graves. Not enough for what was lost. Too much for what should have been avoided. Across the street, Sheriff Ben Hollis paced outside the jailhouse, muttering to himself, cleaning his rifle with a nervous hand. He hadn't slept. Neither had Ruby. She'd spent the night with Tobias Kinney, locked in the cellar of Widow Tierney's, tied at the wrists, watched by the preacher and his son. He hadn't said a word since Bo walked out. Ruby didn't know if it was guilt or fear keeping him silent. Maybe both. Maybe something worse. She turned as the door behind her creaked open. Mrs. Holloway, who'd lost a husband and a son to Clay's crew, stepped outside with a bowl of biscuits and a fresh bruise across her jaw. Ruby nodded. "Thanks, Martha." Mrs. Holloway hesitated. "You sure you want to keep him alive?" Ruby didn't answer right away. "He's all that's left to testify," she said at last. Martha's hands trembled. "Or all that's left to kill." Ruby took the bowl and carried it down the steps. The street looked different in daylight, raw. Like someone had skinned the truth off everything and left it bleeding in the cold. She made her way toward the cellar. Inside, Tobias sat on the floor, with his back against the stone wall. His hair hung in strings and his eyes were dull, no defiance, no fire. Just waiting. For judgment, for death. Ruby didn't know. She set the bowl down in front of him. "You need to eat." He didn't move. She crouched. "I'm not doing this because I pity you. I'm doing this because Bo didn't kill you. That means something. I just haven't figured out what yet." Still no response. Ruby stood again. "You sit in that dark long enough, you're gonna have to choose. Either stand for something or rot like the rest of them." She turned and left him with the biscuits and his shame. Back outside, the air was colder now, the clouds heavier. Sheriff Hollis crossed the street to meet her halfway. "We need a trial," he said. Ruby snorted. "With what jury? We've got witnesses. You, me. Hell, half the town saw Kinney crawl, and the other half want him hanged before sundown." Ben looked down at his boots. "I ain't saying they're wrong. I'm saying if we do it like Clay did it, then we ain't different from him." She stared at him hard, then nodded. "Then we do it right." They held the hearing in the church. It wasn't official. There wasn't a judge. But it was the only place big enough to fit everyone who wanted to look Tobias Kinney in the face and say their piece. Ruby stood in the pulpit, arms crossed. Tobias sat in a chair with his hands bound, guarded by 2 boys with shaking rifles. Ben addressed the town, said what needed saying, laid out the facts, what Kinney had done, what he'd been part of, what he hadn't stopped. No one interrupted. Not yet. Then Ruby stepped forward and asked Tobias the only question that mattered. "Why didn't you stop it?" He looked up at her, voice barely a breath. "Because I was weak." A murmur ran through the room. Ruby waited. He swallowed hard. Because I thought walking away was enough. Because every time we burned a farm or buried a child, I told myself it wasn't me pulling the trigger. Tears rimmed his eyes, but it was. Every time I stayed silent, every time I looked the other way, I was pulling that damn trigger just like the rest of them. Someone in the back of the room cursed. Another spat. But no one moved forward. Not yet. Ruby stepped down. I don't expect anyone here to forgive him, she said. I haven't. But if we kill him without judgment, then we prove Clay McGraw was right. Might is all that matters. Silence. Then Mrs. Holloway stood. Her voice shook, but her spine didn't. If he's to live, she said, he don't live free. He builds, he mends, he teaches our sons what not to become. Ben nodded. Chain gang. No. Redemption gang, she said. He works for the ones he hurt, or he don't work at all. By the end of the hour, it was decided. Tobias would stay. He'd work. He'd serve. He'd answer to the town he helped destroy. No gallows, no gun, just the long road back, if he had the spine for it. When they walked him back to the cellar, Tobias paused in the street and looked toward the mountain ridge beyond town. Ruby followed his gaze. He's gone, she said. Tobias nodded. I know. You thinking of running? He shook his head. I already did. That's how this all started. She watched him be led away in silence. Later that night, Ruby stood alone outside the saloon again, watching the wind chase snow in lazy circles. She held a letter in her hand left on her pillow. Beau's handwriting. Only a few lines. There's nothing left for me in towns, not yet. But if they ever come back Clay's kind, or worse, you send word. I'll know how to find you. She folded it, tucked it into her coat. The fire inside the saloon had been rekindled. For the first time in years, the town was choosing to rebuild instead of bury. But peace was a fragile thing, and snow always returns. You don't heal a town by hanging a man. You heal it by making him carry the weight. Snow deepened in the higher passes of the Bitterroot Mountains, blanketing the world in a silence so thick even time seemed to slow. Beau Ransom lived in that silence. He'd taken up camp near a frozen creek, the kind that ran year-round under the ice. His cabin was little more than pine logs, canvas and stone built by his hands kept standing by habit. Firewood was stacked neat against the wall. A smoked elk haunch hung from a beam. He trapped, he fished, he stayed still. And every few nights he wrote. Not to anyone in particular. Just names, dates, memories written in a careful, rigid hand on brown scraps of paper. He folded each one, tucked it into a metal tin, and buried it in the floorboards under the cot. Letters to ghosts, he called them. This morning, like most, began with the squeal of iron hinges and the bitter cut of cold air as he stepped outside. He stretched, breathed in the sharp scent of pine and snow. Nothing stirred. That meant everything was normal, until it wasn't. Beau spotted the print's first fresh ones cutting through the snow not 50 yards from camp. Hoof tracks, single rider coming in from the north ridge. He crouched, ran a gloved finger over the indentation. Deep, heavy, recent. He went back inside, grabbed the rifle hanging by the door, and waited. The rider came just after midday. Dark coat, wide-brimmed hat pulled low, horse thick with road dust and frost. Beau didn't step out until the man dismounted and called out voice hoarse from the cold. Friend or foe depends on how you greet me. Bo opened the door. The man turned, face scarred, left eye milky white. A burn scar ran from his jawline down into his collar. His coat was stitched in 3 places, patched over with canvas. A revolver on one hip, knife on the other. Bo's voice was calm. Name Reuben Heller. Bo stepped onto the porch. What brings a man like you up here in the dead of winter? Reuben gave a tired smile. I ain't up here for the view. I'm carrying news. Bo said nothing. Reuben reached inside his coat slow and pulled out a folded letter, creased and stained corners worn soft by fingers. He tossed it to Bo. Bo caught it, unfolded it, scanned the lines, then stopped cold. His hands tightened. The name at the bottom of the letter hit like an old wound, reopening Wesley Tate. Bo's throat dried. Where'd you get this? Traded bullets for it down near Flat Rock. Bastard nearly took my arm off. Was carrying a satchel full of letters like that addresses towns' names. Bo's eyes never left the page. Wesley Tate. He should have been dead. Long dead. 15 years back, when Bo came home to fire and ruin, there were 3 men responsible: Tobias Kinney, Clay McGraw, and Wesley Tate. Bo had thought Tate had been killed during a border skirmish with the U.S. Marshals. But if this letter was real, he was alive. And he was moving. Reuben stepped closer. You want the rest of the story? Once. Reuben pulled a flask from his coat, took a swig, and began. Tate ain't just breathing, he's thriving. He's got a new crew, mercs, drifters, ex-soldiers. They hit wagon trains, outposts, even torched a railroad station last month. Bo's jaw tightened. Why? Reuben wiped his mouth. Because no one stopped him when he should have been stopped. And now he thinks he's untouchable. Bo stared into the trees, thoughts already moving faster than the cold could catch. He wasn't angry, not yet. What he felt was deeper, heavier. Obligation. What's your stake in this? Bo asked. Reuben shrugged. Had a brother at Flat Rock. Tate put him in the ground. Figured maybe you and me could help each other. Bo didn't answer. He went inside, poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handed one to Reuben, then sat by the fire. The room was quiet except for the crackle of pine sap burning. Reuben looked around. This where you've been hiding all this time? Bo didn't answer that either. After a long silence, he said, Tobias Kinney's alive. Reuben blinked. You didn't kill him, no? Why not? Bo looked into the fire. Because I was tired of carrying corpses. Thought I'd try carrying something else. Reuben took a sip, like what Hope Bo muttered, then chuckled bitterly. Didn't fit too well. They sat in silence again. Finally, Bo stood, walked to the back wall, and pulled up a floorboard. From beneath, he lifted a battered leather satchel. Inside, ammo maps, folded clothes, the revolver with Eliza's initials on the grip. He buckled the flap, slung it over his shoulder. Where's Tate now? He asked. Last seen heading southeast, toward Colorado territory. Bo strapped the rifle across his back. Reuben raised an eyebrow. So that's it. Just like that, you're riding again. Bo looked at the empty cot, the tin box full of letters to the dead, the cold walls that had never once felt like home. I wasn't resting, he said. Just loading. Reuben smirked. Then let's go load hell onto his doorstep. Bo stepped outside into the snow. The wind had shifted. There was movement on the horizon again. If Wesley Tate's alive, then peace ain't on the table anymore. It's back in the dirt with everyone he left behind. The trail south was carved through wind-whipped plains and ghost towns left for dust. Snow thinned as Bo and Reuben dropped in elevation, but the cold stayed in their bones. It wasn't the kind you could dress against. It was the kind that came from knowing from carrying. 3 days out of the Bitterroots, they reached a watering station burned to the frame. Bo dismounted first, walking slow, rifle in hand. He moved through the ruins like he'd been there before, boot heels crunching glass and blackened floorboard. Reuben followed grim. No bodies. Bo knelt near a collapsed beam, which means they were taken, not killed. Yet. Tate. Bo nodded. Has to be. He stood, eyes scanning the horizon. He's not just running. He's gathering. He's building something. Reuben spat into the ash. Or tearing something down. They found a survivor the next day. An old prospector, half buried in snow, gut-shot but breathing. He was lying beside his mule hand, still on the reins like he'd died trying to drag himself home. Bo knelt beside him, pulled back the man's coat, checked the wound. Bad. Not survivable. The old man's eyes fluttered open. You. One of them, Bo shook his head. No. I'm the one they should have feared. The old man wheezed a laugh. Ain't no fear left in 'em. Just fire and rope. Where'd they go? He coughed blood. Said, next stop was a town north of the divide. Woman there. Saloon gal. Red hair. Bo froze. Reuben caught the change in his eyes. Who Bo stood slowly. Ruby. He turned fast, storming to his horse. Reuben followed. You sure it's the same Ruby? There ain't many women running saloons that can shoot straighter than most men I've met, Bo growled. Tate's drawing blood to draw me. He always played long. They rode hard through the night. By dawn, the horizon broke open to reveal dead elk, cold, quiet. A fog crawling across the rooftops like a warning. Bo's heart pounded as they approached. The first sign something was wrong wasn't smoke. It was silence. No forge ringing. No horses. No morning church bell. Bo and Reuben dismounted near the livery. The doors hung open. Inside, nothing but blood frozen thick on the floor. No bodies. No noise. Bo moved like a man chasing ghosts. When they reached the saloon, he found the front door ajar. Ruby was gone. So was Hollis. So was Kinney. The only thing left was a piece of paper tacked to the wall with a knife. Scrawled in black ink, bring what's left of you to Ridge Hollow. Come alone, or we bury them one bone at a time. Reuben cursed under his breath. This is bait. Bo pulled the knife from the wall, crumpled the paper in his fist. Good. Let's make him choke on it. Reuben grabbed his arm. He says come alone. You know it's a trap. Bo met his eyes. Doesn't mean it ain't worth walking into. You'll die. I ain't worried about that. Reuben stepped back, shook his head. You sure this is what she'd want? Bo strapped his rifle tight. She wouldn't want anyone else dying for her. Least of all me. He turned toward the stable, grabbed the gear he'd stashed there weeks ago, dynamite short-barreled scattergun, a pouch of brass casings, carved with initials. As he cinched the saddle straps on his horse, Reuben stood behind him, arms crossed. You're serious, he said. Bo nodded. Always was. Reuben walked up, handed him a folded piece of cloth. Then take this. Bo opened it. Inside, a bandolier of 45 rounds polished to shine, and a badge Sheriff Holloway's cracked down the middle. Bo looked up. Found it by the church, Reuben said. Figured if you ain't wearing it for law, wear it for memory. Bo tucked the badge into his coat. Mounting up, he took one last look at the town he never meant to love. Burn it if I don't come back, he said. Reuben frowned. Burn what? Bo's voice was gravel. All of it. He rode hard. The miles passed like thunder. Frozen rivers, blackened trees. A hawk above that circled and vanished. Each hoofbeat was a countdown. Each gust of wind another whisper from the past. Ridge Hollow was a basin deep in the canyons surrounded by crags and old mine tunnels. A place forgotten by maps, but remembered by men like Bo, because it was where you went to disappear, and where the worst kinds of men went to be seen. When Bo crested the ridge, the hollow opened before him. Campfires, tents, armed riders, maybe 30 of them. A gallows stood in the center, built fresh rope already swinging in the cold wind, and under it Ruby, tied, bloody, but standing, alive. Bo breathed once slow. Then he whispered, "One last ride, Eliza," and kicked his horse straight into the valley of fire. "I'm not coming down that hill to talk. I'm coming to finish the story. You forgot I was still writing." The first shot cracked like lightning across the canyon. Bo didn't flinch. He leaned forward in the saddle reins, loose in one hand, the other already drawing iron. Ridge Hollow erupted. Gunfire flared from every angle, muzzle flashes spitting fire in the cold morning dark. But Bo didn't slow. He charged straight through it. His horse thundered across the frozen basin, like it knew there was no coming back and didn't care. Bullets clipped the saddle, tore through the edge of his coat. He fired left, then right. 2 riders dropped, the others scattered. Chaos bloomed. He was a ghost again, cutting through flesh and flame with the calm precision of a man who'd already made peace with death. At the gallows, Ruby twisted hard against her bindings as the rope tugged at her throat. Tate's men were trying to pull the lever early. Bo aimed mid-gallop and shot the rope clean in half. She dropped to the ground in a heap, coughing, alive. He vaulted from the saddle mid-run, landed hard, and rolled straight into cover behind an overturned wagon. Gunfire screamed overhead. A bullet dug into his thigh. He bit down hard, wrapped it quick, and kept moving. This wasn't war. This was Judgment Day. Across the hollow, men fell like wheat. Reuben Heller had ignored the note. He'd followed Bo from Dead Elk, and now he came screaming through the North Trail, riding like the devil was chasing him, rifle bucking in his arms. Bo saw him come and smiled once, just once, then turned toward the gallows where Wesley Tate had emerged. Wesley stood calm. Clean coat, 2 silver revolvers, hat low over eyes that hadn't aged a day in Bo's memory. He was taller than Bo remembered. Meaner, too. Wesley raised a hand, and the shooting stopped. The whole hollow went still. Bo stepped out from cover, limping but upright. Ruby stood behind him now, blood on her face, a knife in her hand taken off one of the men who thought she wouldn't fight. Wesley smiled. "Well, damn," he said. "You really came." Bo stared. "You should have stayed dead." "I tried," Wesley said with a shrug. "But it turns out I'm too good at surviving. Just like you." Bo's voice was flat. "Not like me." Wesley's grin dropped. "No, I suppose not. You ever wonder what might have happened if we'd burned that cabin together? Shared the loot, took the border routes." Bo stepped forward. "Every damn day. And I thank God I didn't." They stood 20 feet apart. Too close for rifles, too far for knives, just right for one last truth. Wesley's fingers twitched. Bo didn't move. "I could kill you right now," Wesley said. "But I want to know, why'd you let Kinney live?" Bo's voice was hoarse but sure. "Because one of us had to remember what it meant to be human." Wesley spat. "That word's overrated." Bo's hand hovered near his hip. You ready always? Then came the silence, the kind that bends time, the kind that makes men into myths. Wesley moved first, fast, but Bo was faster. One shot, one breath, and Wesley Tate dropped to his knees, clutching his chest. Blood seeped through his fingers. He looked up at Bo with eyes wide, not in fear, but in realization, like a man who had finally remembered the name of the person who'd come to collect. Bo stepped close, kneeled. Wesley choked, voice weak. You could have been like me. Bo leaned in. No. You could have been better. Then Wesley Tate died. Just like that. No thunder. No prophecy. Just breath. And then none. Bo stood. Looked around. The gang was broken. Reuben had tied up the last few men. Ruby stood tall beside him. Snow began to fall. Light soft like it had been waiting for this. For the end. For peace, 3 days later, they buried the dead in Ridge Hollow. The gallows were torn down plank by plank and set on fire. The wind carried the smoke west. Bo stood at the edge of the clearing, coat buttoned high, the bite of winter fading just a little. Reuben walked up behind him. You gonna stay in Dead Elk this time? Bo didn't answer right away. He watched the fire burn down to embers. I ain't sure I belong anywhere that doesn't need fixin'. Reuben nodded. Funny. I thought maybe this time you were the one being fixed. Bo almost smiled. Ruby approached, then hat in hand, red hair loose in the wind. You heading out again? She asked. I was thinking I'd ride a bit, Bo said. Just long enough to see what the world looks like now that Wesley's gone. You'll come back? He looked her in the eyes. If I don't, it means the world didn't change enough. She stepped closer, touched the edge of his coat. You're not who you were when you rode in. Bo looked at her. Neither are you. They didn't kiss. Didn't need to. Some connections don't beg for touch. They settle in silence, in understanding. Reuben loaded the last saddlebag and mounted up. We ridin' or what? Bo climbed into the saddle, looked once more at Ruby, at the town, at the life he'd started to believe in again. Then he turned to the trail. Sun low, snow glittering, a new path ahead. But not for vengeance. Not anymore. Now it was for watching, for guarding, for making sure no one like Tate ever rose again without meeting a man who remembered what was lost. Because that's the thing about ghosts. They don't haunt the living. They protect them. Bo Ransom was no longer a man running from the past. He was riding straight into it to make sure it didn't happen again. You don't bury the fire. You carry it just enough to keep others warm, not burn the world down again.